Optimism abounds as Pitt opens training camp 2023. The Panthers got started in the South Side yesterday, and we've got 5 things that stood out during the first training camp practice, as well as the media day that happened in the afternoon. Lots to break down on the Morning Pitt today on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Thursday here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below. Don't forget the dash. It's right there, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com and message boards that interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans all day, every day. Pitt fans are talking on Panther-Lair.com. Talking about Pitt sports stuff with each other, football, basketball, and recruiting. Those conversations are going on. You're a Pitt fan. You want to talk to other Pitt fans. The best place to do it is at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And, of course, our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's the place to find all of our exclusive Pitt video content. So like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you never miss any of it. The Morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday, every day of the week. The live show like we did last night, the Wednesday night live show with me and Jim Hammett getting together to talk about Pitt sports. We have post-game shows we'll do once the games actually start. We'll have post-practice interviews and Pat Narduzzi press conferences and all kinds of stuff to keep you up to date with videos of Pitt sports. So make sure you don't miss any of it. Like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Now let's jump into it. Yesterday, Pitt opened training camp 2023. It started with a morning practice, and then they had media day in the afternoon. Jim Hammett was at the practice. He had a great practice report, training camp report there on the site at Panther-Lair.com. Hopefully you got a chance to check that out. And then I was down there with Jim for Pat Narduzzi's press conference and then media day, where we got to talk to a lot of the Pitt players on both sides of the ball, as well as all the assistant coaches and the coordinators. There was a lot going on. There's a lot of content that's already been rolling out. It took us quite a bit of time to transcribe all the interviews and get that stuff published on Panther-Lair.com. We're going to have a lot. We had a bunch last night, and we'll have a lot through the day today and tomorrow. So you want to keep it locked right there. You want to keep your eye on Panther-Lair.com. But there were 5 things that really stood out to me from talking to the Pitt players and the Pitt coaches yesterday. And I thought we'd talk about those 5 things today. And the first one is just an overwhelming sense I got from talking to the Pitt defensive coaches, the defensive players, that they're really not concerned. Yeah, they've got 6 starting jobs that are open, right? I mean, they have to replace 2 starting defensive ends, a starting defensive tackle, a starting middle linebacker, and 2 starting safeties. That's a lot to replace. I mean, 6 out of 11, right? That's more than half. And those are some major playmakers and major contributors that they've got to fill in for. Kalijah Cansey, Servassier Dennis, Brandon Hill, and Eric Hallett. Not to mention the defensive ends who've been very productive over the years. And so they've got a lot of holes to fill, and they've got the volume of, when you have 6 open starting jobs, that typically means you are rebuilding. And so when I walked up to Randy Bates yesterday, it was the first thing I said to him. I said, well, let's start off with a very cliched football question. Are you rebuilding this year or are you reloading? And he said, I mean, put it much more eloquently than I'm going to say it here, that, yeah, it's a bit of a rebuild because of the numbers, but they feel really confident that it's more reloading because of how they've recruited and how they've evaluated and how they've developed over the past few years. Not to mention the fact that the guys that they're going to be counting on have all been on the field. Whether you're talking about Dayon Hayes playing in defensive end, or you're talking about the tackles of Devin Danielson and Tyler Bentley and David Green, not one of those guys might be as productive as Kalijah Cansey was, but they've all been on the field a lot over the past few years. Shane Simon, if he steps into the middle linebacker job, or if Brandon George pushes for that job, I mean, those guys have played a lot. The safeties haven't played as much, but they've been out there. Donovan McMillan has experience after transferring from Florida. Javon McIntyre played a good bit last year. PJ O'Brien has been on the field. Steph Hall probably has the least experience out of those guys, but he's seen some playing time as well. And so talking to Randy Bates and talking to the other Pitt defensive coaches and talking to the Pitt players on defense, you just get a sense that they're really confident about the young guys they have coming up. And I mean, what else are they going to say? I mean, they're not going to turn to us and say, when I ask them about, relying on young players, optimism or confidence or anything like that, they're not going to say, I don't know, man, these kids suck, and we don't think they're ever going to get any better. They're not going to say that. Of course, they're going to say that they're confident and optimistic. But I think there's a real sense that you get that based on the recruiting they've done over the past 5 years, 4 years, 3 years leading into this, that they are confident about that recruiting, that they think they've done a good job loading the roster with talent. So when they run into a year like this where they have to replace 6 starters, then, I mean, next year they might have to replace 5 or 6 again. I mean, to be honest, because Bentley, Danielson, and Green are all seniors. If those are, if even just 2 of those guys are your starters, that's 2 open spots. You could, you're going to lose Shane Simon. You probably will lose Bengali Kamara. You're going to lose both corners, so you're going to be replacing 6 starters again next year. But with the way they've recruited, I think they've got confidence that they're going to be able to pretty much slide guys in there and just keep it rolling on defense. I think when you do replace that many starters in 1 year, you're inevitably going to have probably some bumps along the way. That was actually what Tyquan Underwood said about his receivers. We'll talk about those young receivers in a second. You're going to have some bumps along the way when you're putting that many new players into the unit. But ultimately, there's a lot of confidence about what these young players or even just inexperienced players are going to be able to do. I think they really believe, I mean, certainly the linebackers, because, Shane Simon, if he's a new starter at middle linebacker, or if it's Brandon George, I mean, those guys have played a ton. And, if you have Solomon DeShields or Brandon George, or even Shane Simon at one of the outside linebacker spots opposite Bengali Kamara, again, there's a lot of experience in that group. If they run into 1 or 2 injuries and they have to go into, Aiden Henningham, Kyle Lewis, or one of the freshmen, then it's a different story. But the guys they've got right now, they feel pretty good about, and understandably so. They've got a lot of experience. But, especially when you look at the defensive ends and the safeties, some of them are younger. Some of them are just not very experienced. All of them are stepping into starting jobs for the first time in their careers. But despite that, I think they're very confident about the level of players that they brought in. Confident enough that when they have a transition year like this, they should be able to not really miss too much of a beat and just pick it up and keep rolling with the defensive success that they've had. And to be honest, I kind of agree with them. I think they should be able to do that. I think they should be able to pick up pretty much where they left off. Again, with maybe a few games of transition, and hopefully not anything sort of disastrous. Nothing enormously bad, let's say it that way, in the Cincinnati or West Virginia games. You're going to need to hit the ground rolling by the time you get around to facing Drake May in North Carolina, and we'll talk about that another time. But I think they've got the players to step in here. And I think they've earned, I don't want to say the benefit of the doubt, but to some extent, I think they've earned a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because of how well they've been able to just cycle guys in. After, Paris Ford and DeMar Hamlin left, they were able to come up with Hallett and Hill, and it was pretty good. After Jalen Twyman left, they were able to come up with Kalijah Cansey, and it was good. After Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver left, they were able to come up with Haba Baldonado and Deslin Alexander, and it was good. Pinnock and Mathis and Dane Jackson, I mean, they had these really good corners. Well, they're right back there, and they've been right back there for a year or two. They've been able, I think they've created a pretty good succession plan here on defense with the way they've recruited, and I think you could tell that confidence yesterday. The second thing that stood out to me is I think there's a lot of confidence about the run game as well. I think everybody in that room, all the offensive players that we talked to and all the offensive coaches would acknowledge and agree that Izzy Abanikanda was a special player and was a big part of their offense last year. But I sense a lot of confidence about what this running game is going to be able to do this year. Part of that's due to the offensive line, and we'll talk about those guys in a minute. Part of it is just this is a run offense. This is an offensive system that emphasizes the run and that I think is a good offensive scheme in terms of running the ball. We all know that they need to improve on passing the ball, but I think there's a lot of confidence that if they keep up with this scheme and they're able to build on what they did last year scheme-wise and add to it with the run game, that they're going to be able to have another productive year on the ground. Andre Powell said that, he doesn't know if one of these running backs will put up the yards and touchdowns that Izzy put up last year, but he thinks that collectively they're going to be able to get pretty close to, if not match that production. And you get that sense when you talk to the Pitt coaches. You get that sense when you talk to the players. I think Rodney Hammond, Sebo Flemister, Daniel Carter, those were the three running backs we talked to yesterday. Obviously, Derek Davis is still out there, and then the freshman who came in. But all those guys are very confident that the run game is going to, again, kind of like the defense, more or less pick up where it left off, despite losing one of the best players in the conference at the position. And here again, I'm fairly confident as well. I think Rodney Hammond has shown he can be really good. I think Sebo Flemister finished last season on a really high note. I'm really intrigued by Derek Davis, maybe one of the most interesting players on this roster, or at least on offense outside of the quarterbacks, of course. I'm really intrigued by what he's going to be able to do. I still don't know who that home run threat is going to be, but I think they'll find an effective running game. If this team struggles offensively, I don't think it's going to be because of the running game. It's going to be because of the passing game again, like it was last year. And if the passing game excels, the running game is not going to be, is not going to hold them back. Or they threw the ball great, but they couldn't run to save their lives. I think they're going to be able to run very well. A big part of that, as we move on to number 3, is the strength of the offensive line. Dave Borbely told me he thinks this might be the deepest offensive line they had. Actually, he thinks the deepest offensive line they've had in his time at Pitt was the line they had entering last season. But that line they had entering last season never actually played. Of course, they had all those guys who came back, Carter Warren, Marcus Minor, Owen Drexel, and Gabe Hoy, as well as Jake Cradle. But the first 4 guys choosing to come back for a 6th season. And those 4 plus Cradle forming basically a returning starting 5. But then that starting 5 never playing any games together due to injuries that kind of mixed up the starting lineup all season. Borbely estimated he thinks there were 7 different starting lineups last year. But the line was really deep. The position group was really deep because they were able to slide in Blake Zabovic and Jake Cradle sliding over to center and Matt Gonsalves stepping into a tackle spot and Branson Taylor at a tackle spot. They were able to do that, which speaks to how deep that line was. Now entering this season, all of those guys have that depth, have that experience, and there's a decent amount of depth behind them. Borbely feels like it might be his deepest group other than last year, I guess. And I think talking to the linemen and talking to the other players, I think there's a feeling that this O-line will be better than last year's O-line was. And last year's O-line, I think, certainly finished on a pretty high note, the final months of the season plus the bowl game. 2021 was probably a high watermark for the offensive lines at Pitt. 2016 was really good too. But this year, I think has a chance to be really, really good. And I get the sense from the players that they're pretty optimistic about that as well. Now, again, I know it's media day. It's the first day of training camp. When you're talking to the players, you're going to hear that every position group is going to be great. When we asked some of the players who did they feel like got snubbed on the All-ACC team, which only featured Matt Gonsalves, the only Pitt selection to the All-ACC team was Matt Gonsalves. We asked the Pitt players, well, who do you feel like got left off? Who should have been on there from your team? And they said, well, we feel like everybody should. Well, okay, guys, that doesn't really help me. That's not a very good answer to say that everybody should be on the All-ACC team. I mean, come on now. So, yes, they're all optimistic, but I think there's some genuine, sincere, and merited optimism and confidence about these young players on defense, about the running game, and about the strength of the offensive line. It's going to be very interesting, and this is a good segue as Kenny Johnson appears on the screen next to us, about the young wide receivers. We all know that there's no question those, and now Zion Fowler-L pops up on the screen too. Like, how good is this timing? We got all the freshman wide receivers showing up on the video. We all know those guys, and Izzy Polk. Gosh, we're doing such a great job on the timing here. This is a professional operation on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We know that some of these freshman receivers are going to play. They brought in 4 guys, and they basically have like 4 or maybe 5 guys returning. I mean, they don't have a lot returning at wide receiver in terms of veteran upperclassmen, and they have even less in terms of upperclassmen who have seen the field. They've only got like 3 who have played any significant snaps, and only 2 of them have played any significant snaps at Pitt. It's Konate Mumfield and Bub Means. And so there's a lot of opportunity. There's going to be a lot of snaps to go around, and some of them inevitably are going to go to some of those freshman wide receivers, which we've talked about. And I think we've all sort of come to accept it and assume it. But in talking to Pat Narduzzi, talking to Tyquan Underwood, and talking to some of the other players on the team, I asked Gavin Bartholomew, who's a guy that is going to surprise people this year? Who do you think by the end of the year we're going to be talking about? Somebody we're not talking about right now, but we will be talking about by the end of the year. And Bartholomew said, quote, "I feel like our freshmen receivers, our freshmen in general, but our receivers, they're really stepping up. Zion and all the other guys, they're unreal. They're doing a really good job. I think everybody will be shocked by them." And that's coming from Gavin Bartholomew, that those freshmen have really stood out to him as well. They're going to need those guys. I mean, you can't just play with 2 receivers or 3 receivers. And after Means and Mumfield, you have nothing in the way of a proven player. Dejon Reynolds has some playing time at Florida that he came in with after transferring, but that's about it. You've got Javonte Royal, a converted defensive back, Addison Copeland and Che Wabuko, 2 redshirt freshmen who might as well be freshmen because they never saw the field last year. Of course, Kenny Johnson, Zion Fowler-El, Lamar Seymour, and Israel Polk are going to see the field. Those guys are going to be out there this year. Some of them, at least 1, probably 2, maybe 3, are going to see the field and be part of the mix and part of the rotation at wide receiver. And I think that's absolutely the case. We've all felt that was the case. And now I think we got some further confirmation from Pitt's players and coaches that, yeah, those guys are going to be in the mix, and they're probably going to help the team and make positive plays for the team based on some of the early reviews. And the last thing that stood out to me yesterday at Media Day, Jim Hammett and I go around at Media Day. We kind of have a plan, because they'll bring in 10 or 12 offensive players. We'll talk to those guys for 20 minutes or half an hour. And then they'll bring in 10 or 12 defensive players, and we'll talk to those guys for 20 minutes or half an hour. And we kind of have a plan of how we go around and, what we're going to do. You can't just wander around and see what's interesting. And we'll have a lot of chances to talk to these guys throughout camp. So in this setting, we try to do like these surveys, and we'll come up with a set of questions, 6 questions we ask everybody, and put all their answers together. And we'll have that stuff on Panther-Lair.com. You'll like it. There's a lot of good stuff in there. One of the questions we asked them about, though, was about Pat Narduzzi making national headlines this summer, whether he was criticizing Deion Sanders and the way Sanders has run the Colorado program since taking over this offseason, or when he was talking about an NIL salary cap last week. And we didn't really ask the players for their thoughts on Narduzzi's comments, the content of those comments, but rather just the fact that he seems to get himself into the national headlines fairly frequently, I would say, once or twice a year. Something Pat Narduzzi says goes viral, as the kids would say. And so we asked him, what do you think when you see this stuff? Do you just crack up like, oh, there goes Deuce doing it again? And the answer, almost across the board, was some version of, that's my coach. I support him, whatever he says. That's my head coach. And we weren't really asking about, again, the content of the comments. Not, hey, do you agree with what he said? It's more just about getting the national the national headlines and getting all this recognition and getting all this attention. And so we didn't ask, like, do you agree? But even then, some of the guys said, you know what? He's just saying what a lot of people were thinking. Like, this is coming from some of the college players. A few guys said, I think he's just saying what people were thinking. Bengali Kamara said it. I think Matt Gonsalves said it, or somebody, I forget who said it. One of the other guys. I had all the quotes here. But even some of the guys were saying that they agree with him. But across the board, though, they all support him, and they all say, well, that's my coach, and I'm going to have his back. If he says it, all right, that's good enough for me. And I think that's, I don't know what kind of answers I expected to get out of those questions. I actually thought guys would make jokes about it. That Narduzzi runs his mouth and this kind of thing. But they all seem to respect him for being honest about who he is. And I think that's a big part of the attraction and appeal. Not all of it, but I think it plays significantly in the recruiting process of Narduzzi being himself, of Narduzzi not sugarcoating or pretending to be something or someone he's not, for better or for worse. And it probably rubs some guys the wrong way. It probably rubs some fans the wrong way. And sometimes it even bugs us in the media of like, come on, man, what are you doing? Why are you making this more difficult than it has to be? And we've talked about some of these comments in the past. I mean, when we talked about the NIL salary cap thing last week, we talked about how Narduzzi might have a good idea, but he doesn't always put it out there the right way. But you can say this about him. He's putting it out there honestly. He's saying it the way he thinks about it, and he's saying what he really believes. He doesn't really hold back. Even when it might be in his best interest to do so, he doesn't really hold back. And I think you have to have at least a little bit of respect for that. Even if you might admire a little more discretion, you can have some respect for the candor. And I think his players very much do respect it, because I think for as much as he will stand up for what he believes, they all know and believe that he will stand up for them, that he'll have their back. And I think you see very few disgruntled players coming out of Pitt, either transfers or guys who leave for the NFL or whatever it is. Yeah, every now and then there might be a little dust up, but even that, I think, has. I don't always buy it when some of the guys, when we've seen some guys in the past, a few years ago, make some criticisms of the program of Narduzzi. I don't entirely think those were. I think sometimes they're a bit disingenuous in the criticisms, but I think Narduzzi does have his players back. I think he believes in his convictions and supports his players because of his convictions, and I think the players respect that and appreciate that, and I think they appreciate that he stands up for what he believes in and says it. So I thought that was pretty interesting too, and I think it speaks to the culture, the whole program right now. So that's those were 5 things that stood out to me. You've been reading all the content and all the coverage. What stood out to you so far from the first day of training camp and the media day? Put it in the comments or on the message boards. We'll have a little discussion about it. And we've got lots of content coming at Panther-Lair.com, so make sure you tune in for that. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. For lots of coverage from Pitt training camp. It's going to keep rolling throughout the day, today, tonight, tomorrow. It'll be all over. Panther-Lair.com, lots of stuff for you to read, lots of stuff for you to digest. We'll have coverage from camp tomorrow, and I think we'll have a mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt tomorrow as well. So if you want to get some questions in, go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Between Fifth and Forbes message board, we've got the mailbag thread there. You can post your comments or post your questions, about Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, whatever is on your mind. It can all go right there. On the message boards, Panther-Lair.com, the Between Fifth and Forbes message board. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We appreciate that. And thanks for tuning in today. We're almost at the end of the week. I can't believe it's Thursday already. I have a ton of work to do ahead of tomorrow. Better get this 3-2-1 column written. So you know what I'll be doing today. While Pitt doesn't have us down at practice, I'm going to be working on that and lots more Pitt coverage. So stay tuned here at Panther-Lair.com and YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your Thursday. We'll talk to you tomorrow on the Morning Pitt right here, YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.